Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, an ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis over the weekend. We'll get into the details coming up. And a good Monday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the show 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app by searching for the Nick Craig Show. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning, as always, is brought to you by Melissa Gott and the amazing team over at the Law Group here in Wilmington. Visit them online, lawgroupnc.com, or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. Before we get into the situation in Minneapolis, Minnesota over the weekend, want to just do a quick kind of recap of the winter weather across the state of North Carolina over the weekend. Fortunately, and as we talked about in the latter parts of last week, fortunately not seeing a whole lot here in southeastern North Carolina. Maybe a little bit of freezing rain early in the morning on Sunday yesterday. That fortunately cleared out pretty quickly, and some of the major ice totals that we were predicting across the state fortunately did not materialize either, and that means that this morning we're only looking at about 30,000 customers. I say only. Obviously, if you're in that number, that's a miserable way to start your day. But only 30,000 customers without power. The vast majority of them are in Hendersonville, North Carolina. That's in Henderson County on Interstate 26, south of Asheville, where you've got about 13,000, a little over 13,000 people without power there. Transylvania County, about 3,500 people without power as well in that area. So most of those outages over in western North Carolina, where the highest levels, I should say, of icing took place. Things are going to stay chilly in the coming days in terms of black ice. Could see maybe a little bit of that here across the coast, but more predominantly in the central and western half of North Carolina. Fingers crossed things weren't anywhere near as bad as they could have been here. However, that is not the case for some of our neighbors in other states. You look at some of the outages over in Tennessee this morning, almost 250,000 people without power right now as Nashville got hit and rocked particularly hard. A similar situation in some other states as well. 157,000 people without power in Mississippi, 123,000 without power in Louisiana. So some major power outages this morning. Crews will be out in the days that follow to get some of those folks restored. In all, looking at just shy of 1 million customers without power, more than 1 million individual people without power, but about 800, I should say, and 26,000 customers without power. A little past 7 a.m. here Eastern Time on this Monday edition of the Nick Craig Show. The news, the big story over the weekend involved more chaos in the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota, as for weeks now we have continued to talk about, and you've heard the coverage, you've seen it, whether you've been on social media, watching cable news, listening to the radio, podcasts, anything political over the last couple of weeks, you are very familiar with and very aware of the situation that continues to unfold throughout the state of Minnesota, but more particularly in the city of Minneapolis. And so the question for you today, and this is not a loaded question, I'm going to try and explain where my head is on it, but the question is this: what is the goal in Minneapolis? From both sides. You've, of course, got what the federal government is continuing to do, and then you, of course, have got what these left-wing agitators, what these left-wing politicians like Mayor Fry, like Governor Walz, what is their goal in what is going on in the state? So as we work through the program on this Monday, I'm going to bring you my thoughts on that, and of course we'll hear some of yours as well. So we'll take you back to Saturday. That is when a federal agent shot and reportedly killed a man who was allegedly brandishing a gun at officers, federal law enforcement officers in Minneapolis. This happened while those federal officers were attempting to arrest an illegal criminal migrant. somebody who was illegally in the United States of America, somebody who had determined that it was not appropriate for them to follow federal immigration law, that they were going to ignore that and come into the United States illegally. This has been a reoccurring thread now for almost a year since the start of this Trump administration, the 47th president of the United States. We have seen this similar story time and time again. So, as you would expect and as you would hope, the federal government is enforcing federal immigration law, which, really is kind of the irony in all of this. The federal government, ICE, Border Patrol, CBP, whatever entity we're talking about, they are simply enforcing federal immigration law. They are simply enforcing law that has been enshrined by Congress and previously signed by a president of the United States. That's what's going on here. That's the discussion that should be taking place. Now, that doesn't fit the left-wing narrative. That doesn't move the ball down the field for them in any significant way politically. So they tend to ignore that part of the discussion. They tend to ignore that part of the equation. Because if you asked almost any American citizen, put them in a vacuum and say, do you support the federal government enforcing federal immigration law? You would presumably find that over 90% of people, maybe even higher, say, yes, I do. In general, the vast majority of the American public, and a very large majority, I think I'll state, a very large majority supports people following the law. They themselves, the vast majority of the American populace, they follow the law. They don't steal. They don't do things that are in abject to whether state, local, or federal law. For the most part, we follow the law. And so when you ask them, hey, do you support individuals snubbing their nose at the federal government, snubbing their nose at the United States of America, and breaking federal immigration law, most people say, no, I don't support that at all. So as we have seen now for the better part of a year, the federal government continues to conduct these operations across the United States. Most recently, we have seen the powder keg that is Minneapolis, Minnesota. And there's a bunch of different events that all kind of tie into this. A lot of it was brought on by the Nick Shirley video that was dropped right around Christmas, in which he documented tens of billions of dollars worth of potential fraud being taken in the city of Minneapolis and St. Paul and throughout the state of Minnesota, predominantly by Somali immigrants in the United States who were running sham healthcare and childcare systems, collecting millions upon millions of dollars a year from the state and federal government, where they in fact were not providing any services whatsoever. That was one of the first events that really brought a huge magnifying glass as to what is going on in the state of Minnesota, and for the most part outraged a lot of the American citizens and population. And again, rightfully so. We're law-abiding citizens. We pay our taxes. We follow the law. We do those things. You're browsing social media in and around Christmas, and you're seeing posts on there. You're seeing video clips from Nick Shirley's video highlighting how there's 37 daycares that are apparently operating in some abandoned building in St. Paul. The building is some old brick building. All the windows are covered up. There may be a sign in front of it. There may not be. And there's 37 daycares operating here. All of them receiving hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars a year from the state of Minnesota. A lot of that money being passed through from the federal government. Federal funds going to the state doling it out to individuals that are supposed to be providing the services. We know that that wasn't happening. The heat got so strong that the Minnesota governor and Tim Walz, who was planning on running for re-election just up until a couple of weeks ago, said that he was done, that he was no longer running for governor, a second or third term as governor. Why is that the case? He claims it's because he is going to focus every single day in the remainder of his term, which will end later this year, that he is going to fight every single day for the people of Minnesota and doesn't want the campaign to be a distraction. I'll remind you, as I have in the past, this is the same guy that just ran for vice president in 2024. So it's too distracting for him to rerun as the governor, to run for re-election, but it wasn't distracting for him to go around the entire country and campaign with Kamala Harris to try and become the vice president of the United States. As hopefully as I laid that out, you can understand how that is a bogus, nonsensical excuse. Why is Tim Walz not running for re-election? Because this controversy, this scandal is likely too much for him to win. And he understands that. Presumably the people around him, his political operatives around him, have told him the controversy on this is likely too high and you aren't going to win re-election. So he decided to take the graceful route and not run. So you've had this battle that's been going on now in the state now for the better part of a month, but over the last couple of months, and things have continued to escalate and get out of control. It was just a couple of weeks ago, the Renee Good situation unfolded. She decided that it was in her best interest to spend her day riding around in her car, actively blocking the road, parking parallel in the middle of a two-way street, trying to block federal immigration officials from conducting lawful operations to enforce federal immigration law. She was put into a situation by herself where she did this. She had a run-in with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, had a run-in with federal law enforcement, and right before she was about to be held to account for her actions and potentially arrested or detained by federal authorities, she decided to put her car into drive and accelerate towards federal officers. An officer, fearing for his life, deployed his firearm, shot, and killed her. And that was one of the events, one of the large events that we covered here on the show that you have heard a lot about in the coming weeks. A completely avoidable situation, as I mentioned at the time. Something that did not have to play out the way in which it did. And of course, they paint her as just some soccer mom minding her own business. Meanwhile, it has now come to fruition, and we have now learned that she spent the entirety of that day actively impeding the work of federal law enforcement. She spent her entire day trying to obstruct ICE, obstruct Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and decided, and under her power, under her ability, that she was going to stop the federal government from enforcing federal immigration law. And very unfortunately, we saw how that played out for her. I'm not a fan of violence. You will never hear me sit here and condone violence. I'm not a fan of death. I'm not a fan of people dying. I'm not a fan of people getting shot and killed. You're never going to hear that from me. I'm not a fan of that whatsoever. I'm never going to advocate for it. So you had the Renee Good situation back a couple of weeks ago. Now turning our attention to the story this weekend. On Saturday in Minneapolis, similar situation. Federal law enforcement conducting an operation, according to Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino, identified an individual known as Jose Chuma, whose record allegedly included domestic assault, disorderly conduct, driving without a valid license. All of that, he was wanted for assault and was in the midst of being apprehended by federal authorities when, according to DHS, quote, an individual approached U.S. Border Patrol officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. That individual has now been identified. The story has taken a mind of its own at this point. It's been a major topic of situation, through a major topic of discussion, I should say, throughout the weekend. The individual who was shot and killed by federal authorities is a 37-year-old Minneapolis resident by the name of Alex Pretti, Pretti, or Pretty. I'm not exactly sure how it's pronounced. He was at an anti-ICE protest, which is fine. You've heard me say this before, but I'll clarify maybe for anybody new listening to the program. I am in full support of individuals' right to protest. I actually, unlike the left, believe in our Constitution. I support every piece of our Constitution. I don't just pick and choose certain things that I agree or disagree with. The Constitution, as it stands, is a document that I support. You have the right as an individual to protest. You have the right to express your free speech against the government. That is literally what the Constitution protects you, specifically with the federal government, which is one of the misnomers when we talk about things like free speech. It protects you against the government. So for the individuals that have been out in, which I'll note, frigid temperatures, the temperature Saturday morning in Minneapolis when this took place with the wind chill was like negative 10 degrees. Nevertheless, these individuals are out in the street voicing their displeasure with the federal government, which is their right to do. However, there is a very thin line between protesting, standing on the side of the street with your signs and your bullhorns and your drums and your frog costumes and all of the fun things that we've seen as these ICE operations continue to take place across the country. There is a very fine line between that and actively impeding the work of law enforcement. And that is seemingly where the conversation stops. That is where you don't hear anybody mentioning and talking about this. If you have been watching CNN or MSNBC or reading the New York Times or any of these other left-wing hacks of media outlets over the weekend, they never mention that at all. It seemingly is not part of the discussion whatsoever. They will, like we saw with Renee Good, make it out as if this is just some person minding their own business that was just brutally executed by federal authorities. And it's just not the case. Now, similar to the Renee Good story, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know exactly what went on. I am not in the business of doing that. I was not on the ground in Minneapolis on Saturday. I am not a trained law enforcement professional or expert. I've never served in any sort of law enforcement capacity. I am at the same time also not an attorney. So I believe it would be woefully inappropriate for me to sit here and determine and tell you one way or the other, this is a justified shooting or it's not. That is for the courts to decide. I have no official experience or training in that field. And so anybody predominantly on social media, also as well on cable news, telling you they know exactly what went down with this situation with Alex Priddy is a fool. They don't. There's only a very few people, mostly individuals with Border Patrol and DHS, that actually know what happened. It would be the individuals that were attempting to apprehend him when he was fatally shot and killed. The video, which you have in all likelihood, you have seen at this point, shows DHS officials, individuals with ICE and Border Patrol, attempting to arrest or detain this individual who we now know is Alex Priddy. He is actively working against them. He is currently and actively resisting arrest from these federal authorities. I believe you can hear in the video, it's hard to tell, there's a lot going on. You can hear somebody yell gun, gun, gun multiple times, and it is not long after that a member of federal law enforcement discharges his firearm, shooting and killing Alex Priddy. And I will say another situation that is likely could have been completely avoidable. In terms of protesting, now everybody can do what they want. They can live their lives. And one of the narratives in the headlines that you will likely see and will likely continue to see is that he was a lawful gun owner. That's somehow the carrying card in all of this, is that Alex Priddy was a lawful gun owner. He had a gun permit. I don't know what the gun laws are in Minneapolis or Minnesota, but that's what everybody is saying. He was a lawful gun owner. Okay, fine. I will say this and state this publicly. I am also a lawful gun owner. I have a legal concealed carry permit in North Carolina. And during COVID-19, during the unconstitutional government shutdowns that took place here in North Carolina, when you had Democrat governor, now turned Senate candidate Roy Cooper, shutting down businesses unconstitutionally barring individuals' rights to practice their faith and go to church, picking and choosing what businesses can or cannot operate, which is absolutely against our state and, in some respects, the federal constitution. I went to dozens of Reopen NC protests across the state. Not once did I even contemplate the idea of bringing a firearm or one of my firearms. Never in a million years did I think that was a good idea. A lot of this comes back to something that you've heard me talk about for years now, which is the lack of personal responsibility and personal accountability that continues to portray across the United States. I don't know anybody that is in law enforcement, that is in private security, that will tell you it is a smart idea to bring a loaded firearm, in this case with multiple additional extended magazines, to a protest. And in some cases, depending on where you are in some municipalities, it's actually illegal to do so. Even if you are somebody that has a legal concealed carry permit or a gun permit, depending on the state and municipality that you're in. In some cases, in those large demonstrations, it is actually illegal to conceal carry a firearm or have a firearm at all unless you're a sworn member of law enforcement. The same way that it was not wise for Renee Good to try and speed away from law enforcement when they were telling her to get out of her car, this was not a smart idea by Alex Preedy to not only show up to an ICE protest with a loaded firearm, but then actively resist arrest from law enforcement. I am not happy that this situation unfolded. I don't like when people are killed. I don't like death and destruction at all. You're never going to hear me sit here and advocate for that. That's not me. That's not what I stand for. But folks, where is the personal responsibility in this? Why are you resisting arrest from federal law enforcement? Why are you putting them in a position where potentially they could feel threatened for their lives and feel that they need to use lethal force? And that's exactly the question. Why would you put yourself in that situation? It is incredibly unwise to do that. When a federal law enforcement agent tells you to get out of the effing car and you're Renee Good and you decide that you're going to put it in drive and accelerate towards law enforcement, we see what the end result is. It's miserable. It sucks. There's somebody that's dead because of it. Similar situation in Minneapolis on Saturday. You are actively being detained by law enforcement. You have a loaded firearm somewhere on your persons, and you are actively resisting arrest. What the hell are you thinking? Who is telling you this is a good idea? Who? What are you seeing online? What are you reading that you think this is a smart thing to do? And again, it comes back to some level of personal responsibility and some level of personal accountability. Similar to the Renee Good situation, I believe that this in large part was preventable, that it did not have to play out the way in which it did. Had Alex Preedy not brought a loaded firearm to an ICE protest on Saturday, he is likely still alive today. We are likely talking about something very different on the show on this Monday. Had he not even resisted apprehension from federal law enforcement, we might be talking about a completely different story as well. He decided to do both of those things, and unfortunately, it has now led to his death. Very, very unfortunate. President Donald Trump did a phone interview with the Wall Street Journal on Sunday night. He had about a 5-minute phone call with the Journal and said, quote, we're reviewing everything and we'll come out with a determination. Saying, quote, I don't like any shooting. I don't like it. But I don't like it when somebody goes into a protest and he's got a very powerful, fully loaded gun with 2 magazines loaded up with bullets also. That doesn't play good either. The gun, allegedly a P320, that's a 6-hour 9mm pistol, with the president commenting and highlighting some of some of the details to the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. As I mentioned, you have probably seen some of the social media video that has unfolded. I'm not here to make a determination. I don't believe it would be appropriate for me to sit here and say, oh, this is totally justified. Or on the flip side, this is totally unjustified. ICE executed this guy in the middle of the street. It's very easy as individuals to go on social media, go on YouTube or watch cable news and watch them dissect this video frame by frame by frame. Meanwhile, when this is happening in real time, this is all happening literally in the snap of a finger. Within seconds, you've got a situation that from a federal law enforcement standpoint seemingly got very out of hand very quickly. And so all of the analysis, I saw a lot of this over the weekend, and I read through a couple of them. The New York Times analysis of the shooting video. That's not a good way to go about this. It's just not. If you can sit here and think that you can make a full-on determination and think that you can kind of Monday morning quarterback this thing frame by frame by frame as it's unfolding in real time, is not how reality works. We've seen this hundreds of times with law enforcement. They are put into a position where they have to make split-second decisions to protect themselves, to protect their colleagues, and to protect the rest of the public. Sometimes those decisions are properly made. Sometimes those are not good decisions that are made. It is unfortunately something that comes with the territory. It is unfortunately something that comes with the job. And it's why I don't understand the amount of scrutiny that we've seen over law enforcement in recent years about how everybody is seemingly portraying themselves as some sort of law enforcement expert, some sort of expert when it comes to the use of lethal force. Nobody is, at least nobody that you're seeing post about this stuff online. So there will be an investigation, as President Trump noted to the Wall Street Journal over the weekend. They're looking at things, they're reviewing, they're likely have already done so, if not already soon, interviewing the agents involved in this attempted apprehension that led to the shooting. They will continue to do that. So back to the way in which I opened the show. What's the goal in Minneapolis? What is the goal in these cities where you have continued to watch now for weeks? Protesters, left-wing agitators, paid operatives, what is their goal? I think it's one that's pretty simple. They want the federal government to roll out of Minneapolis. They want the federal government to stop enforcing federal immigration law. And they will go to whatever ends necessary to make sure that that objective comes to fruition. They will put themselves in whatever situation. They will stand out in the negative 15-degree wind chill to make sure that they can do that. That is their goal. That is their objective. And for the elected officials in Minnesota and in Minneapolis, Mayor Frey, Governor Walz, they aren't helping the situation at all. You've heard the rhetoric. We covered it 2 weeks ago with the Renee Good story. You heard the commentary from Mayor Frey. You heard the expletive-filled rant that he went on about how ICE needs to get out of the city. You're not allowed here. You're not wanted here. Well, ICE is, in fact, allowed there. ICE doesn't have to get your opinion, does not have to get your blessing to enforce federal immigration law. But for those on the political left, these left-wing agitators, these left-wing protesters that remain in the streets, they have bought into this narrative and believe that they are, I guess, the heroes in this situation. Meanwhile, what are they doing? They are protecting individuals that have illegally come into the United States of America. This is the absurdity in all of this. You have got now multiple individuals that have put their lives on the line, not for their fellow U.S. citizen, not for the country as a whole. They are willing to risk death to protect individuals that did not even have the basic respect to follow federal immigration law. That is how deranged this situation is. This is how brainwashed these people truly are. And I don't have any other way to describe it besides calling it a brainwashing. You're willing to use your car to run over a federal agent so that you can protect some Honduran illegal immigrant that is accused of driving drunk and killing somebody? That's what you're willing to do? Why? Where's the logic in any of that? Similar situation this past weekend. According to Border Patrol, you've got an individual who they were very well aware of, who had multiple charges against them, including domestic assault, disorderly conduct, driving without a valid license, wanted for assault. This is the good guy, quote unquote, that you're protecting. And for Alex Preety, I guess so. So that's the goal of the left. They want to neuter the federal government. They want to make it so this administration is afraid to enforce immigration law. They had their shot at this during the Biden administration. They, in large part, ignored federal immigration law. They waved the green flag, the go flag down at the southern border, allowed potentially tens of millions of people to cross into our country illegally, all under the auspices of you're probably never going to be held to account for this because we're not going to enforce federal immigration law. That was something that blew up in the face of the previous administration. It was something that the vast majority of the American public did not agree with, did not support, which led to the rise of the Trump administration and a major election victory in November of 2024. So that's the left-wing goal on this. What is the Trump administration's goal? It's one that I think is very simple. Trump ran on enforcing federal immigration law and mass deportations of individuals who are in the United States illegally. He ran on it. You can now claim that you don't like it. What you can't claim is that you didn't think this was going to happen. He was abundantly clear this is how the situation was going to unfold. You might not like it, but he didn't lie about it. He campaigned on it. He won tens of millions of Americans' votes with some of that rhetoric, with some of those action plans to conduct these mass deportations. And he and the federal government are going to continue to play this out. At least I think they should. Republicans are already starting to get a little squirmish on this whole thing. I've got a clip on that coming up as, of course, the media gets their microphones and cameras in front of every Republican's face. Do you support the federal government executing people in the middle of the street? Republicans, as always, are folding like a cheap suit for the against the left-wing mob, the left-wing media. We'll get into those details coming up here in just a couple of minutes. Before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington. Thank Melissa Gott and her team for their continued support of the Nick Craig Show, and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group. Since 2003, their experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across Eastern North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense. If so, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. They're located in downtown Wilmington and just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. Give them a call, 910-251-6088, or visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team's continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. On the other side, I've got some comments from Vice President J.D. Vance. Also, an interesting video circulating around an interview that took place with James Comer, who is a very prominent member in the United States House, about this. He is seemingly getting a little squirmish about the federal government continuing these ICE operations. Plus, an interesting article over at Fox News. The headline reading is this: the far left network that helped put Alex Purdy in harm's way, they made him a martyr. We'll get into all of those details coming up as the Nick Craig Show rolls on a Monday morning, streaming live on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Monday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show as we continue our coverage this morning of another ICE-involved shooting in Minneapolis, Minnesota over the weekend as tensions continue to grow between local municipalities and the federal government. You can get access to our daily show notes and support the show financially by visiting patreon.com/Nick Craig. You'll get access to our daily show notes and our exclusive Nick Craig Show monthly hangout coming up later this week. All of that available over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. You can also find the link by visiting the website, nickcraig.com. One of the things that's not really talked about at all in this Minneapolis story, and I don't remember where I saw this or heard this, but the point was made. Why is a better question, why is the federal police, or why are local law enforcement, why are they not doing crowd control? It is not the responsibility of ICE or Border Patrol to do crowd control. That's not what they're there to do. They are there to conduct strategic operations against individuals who are deemed to have been in the United States illegally. Yet, in Minneapolis and largely throughout the entire state of Minnesota, you continue to see these comments. You continue to see these narratives being pushed by the governor, by the mayor of Minneapolis, telling their law enforcement that they have control over, whether it's state police or local police, to back down. That is putting the federal government in a position where not only are they having to conduct these operations against people illegally in the country, but they're having to actively do crowd control because the local police are told to back off. This is a miserable failure of local governments. This is a miserable failure. I would even argue dereliction of duty by the elected individuals in the state of Minnesota that are allowing these situations to continue to unfold. Allowing violent left-wing agitators out on the streets assaulting law enforcement, which is exactly what happened Sunday night. Sunday night in Minneapolis, you have a situation in which groups of anti-ICE protesters swarmed a hotel lobby where they believed ICE officers and other federal authorities were staying. They obviously have to sleep somewhere. So you had these groups of left-wing agitators graffitiing, smashing the windows, and harming federal law enforcement agents. There's pictures now that have been made available showing multiple Border Patrol officers with bloodied hands and bloodied faces as individuals were throwing bricks, rocks through windows, glass shattering all over the place. This is what Tim Walz and Mayor Fry have created. And it goes back to, what is the goal? They want complete and total chaos on the streets, and they want the federal government to run away with their tail between their legs. And I am hopeful that the federal government doesn't take this bait, that the federal government does not put themselves in a situation where they feel that they need to back out of these situations because it's getting out of control. Unfortunately, because Republicans, for the most part, typically have no spine when it comes to this stuff, we're already starting to see individuals walking this back. Here was a James Comer on Fox News on Sunday hinting that, well, maybe it's time that we start backing up these operations. Take a listen to this.
If I were President Trump, I would almost think about, okay, if the mayor and the governor are going to put our ICE officials in harm's way, and there's a chance of losing more, innocent lives or whatever, then maybe go to another city and let the people of Minneapolis decide, do we want to continue to have all of these illegals? Are we going to allow our governor, attorney general, and mayor to get away with this? And I think the people of Minnesota would rebel against their leadership, because it's very clear that a majority of Americans want the criminal illegals apprehended, and that's what ICE is trying to do.
Now, again, his point, I don't inherently disagree with, innocent people or casual bystanders or whatever being at risk, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about individuals who are actively impeding the work of local law enforcement, which also, I'll note, is a crime to do so. You as a citizen, regardless of who you are or what you are, you don't have the ability to impede federal, local, or state law enforcement. That is, in fact, a crime in itself, but the local officials and the state officials in Minnesota continue to encourage it. And so you've got these far left groups that are doing so. Fox News has a great article that is kind of highlighting how these situations are unfolding. The article reads in part, a coordinated web of encrypted chats, street alerts, and tracking of ICE, quote, abductors in a sophisticated database reviewed by Fox News Digital shows that agitators were already mobilized at the scene where 37-year-old Alex Purdy was killed minutes before any shots were fired. Over the following hours, a nationwide network of socialist, communists, and Marxist-Leninist cells in the United States leveraged the tragic fatality into a nationwide protest operation. While grief and outrage over Purdy's death is genuine, the network's real-time rapid response using short sensationalized video clips and emojis as weapons of propaganda offers a window into the discipled logistics, messaging, and coordination of far-left warriors fomenting insurgency-like confrontations with authorities. Vice President J.D. Vance commented on the situation, saying, this level of engineering chaos is unique to Minneapolis. It is the direct consequences of far-left agitators working with local authorities. And the web and the groups, they are in fact very sophisticated. The encrypted signal messages obtained by Fox News Digital in real time show that anti-ICE rapid responders were actively tracking, broadcasting, and summoning backup around federal agents outside of the Doll Donut shop in Minnesota where the shooting happened. Local rapid responders made at least 26 entries into a database called Minnesota Ice Plates in the critical hours before and after the killing, documenting the license plate numbers and details of alleged ICE vehicles they claim to see around the situation. And so this kind of expose from Fox News Digital, which I'll throw in the show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig, shows all of these screenshots, shows a very sophisticated database system that is being used with pictures and times and locations in which individuals are actively building out a network to dox and to obstruct federal law enforcement. And I'm sorry. You do not have the right to do that. You want to protest? Have at it. I don't care if I might think that the protest is stupid, but there is that line, as I mentioned, where protesting turns into obstruction, where protesting turns into a situation where you are now actively impeding the work of federal law enforcement. That is not okay. That is, in fact, a crime. You are not allowed to do that because you believe that you're walking around on some moral liberal high ground and you're justified in every single action you take. That is not how this system plays out. These left-wing groups, these left-wing politicians want to browbeat the federal government out of cities like Minneapolis. And I am hopeful that this administration and this president doesn't take the bait. You don't get to decide as a local state or a local municipality. You don't get to decide whether federal immigration law is implored or not. You don't get to determine whether the federal government is allowed to enforce federal immigration law. You might want to. You might think that you have the right to do so. You might hold your expletive-filled news conference where you use a bunch of mean and bad words in front of the public to show how strong you are as a leader. That doesn't change the fact that these are federal operations that I think the vast majority of the American people think need to continue. That is what voters were promised in 2024. That is what voters supported in 2024. And that is what they want to see play out. The situation remains incredibly dynamic. Local officials in Minneapolis and throughout Minnesota continue to ratchet up the pressure. We will wait and see what the administration does in response. We'll bring you the details right here on the Nick Craig Show. It's miserable. It's totally avoidable. It's totally preventable. And I genuinely don't understand kind of where we go from here in all of this. I really don't. We know what the objective is on the left. It's to force federal forces out. And if they're successful in doing that, they are writing a free pass for any ICE operations going forward. Back to the clip from James Comer, he makes the point, go to another city and this is not how this is going to work. If the officials in Minneapolis are successful in driving federal forces out, these left-wing activist groups backed by George Soros and all of these other big money left-wing donors, they will conduct and continue to play out these same operations in every other municipality where ICE is conducting operations. It will become their new playbook. And I would expect it to. If you've been successful with something, if you were successful in your objective, which is to drive ICE out, why would you not copy that and implement it anywhere else where those operations are taking place? That is the risk that this administration deals with if they, unfortunately, bow down to the pressure and hightail it out of Minneapolis. I don't want people shot and killed. I don't want ICE officers assaulted. I don't want these situations to continue to unfold the way in which they are right now. It's not good for the country. It's not good for this administration. It's not good for the people in the places in which this stuff is going on. It is a lose, 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 lose situation. But I can almost guarantee you, and I don't make many guarantees. Politics is not a a situation where guarantees typically are very fruitful. But I can guarantee you, if these left-wing agitators are successful in driving these federal forces out of Minnesota, you will see this exact same situation unfolding in every other American city. It will essentially neuter the Trump administration's ability to enforce federal immigration law. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to sign on for that. I'm not going to sit here this morning and tell you that is a situation that I'm okay with. I'm not. I voted for President Trump. I was appalled by the actions of the previous administration as it related to immigration. I was appalled with the complete lack of authority that was being stressed by the previous administration to enforce federal immigration law. I didn't support it. I actively worked against it. I got out and supported President Donald Trump. He won, and now he's attempting to conduct said operations. And they don't just stop because left-wing agitators decide to make, and what I will say is, crappy decisions, put themselves in miserable positions like bringing a loaded handgun to a protest or trying to drive your car into a federal immigration officer. Just because you put yourself in that stupid situation doesn't mean that the operations conclude. It's an interesting political issue for this administration to deal with. I'm not oblivious to the fact, I'm not ignorant to the fact that the public perception on this isn't great. For the most part, a large majority of people, it's probably 80 or 90%, see the video that is now circulating around social media and they find it appalling. Again, just the video itself. They're not in favor of the government conducting executions. You know, I'm not a fan of that either. I'm not some a heavy-handed government person. You're not going to find a situation where I support that stuff. You're just not, because it's not what I support. It's not what I agree with. I don't like over-aggressive force from the federal government. But I also, at the same time, do not support local government officials using their platform, using their authority, using their ability to encourage these left-wing agitators, to encourage these left-wing protesters to get out in the streets and actively impede the work of federal law enforcement. Those two things I can understand, and I can and come to the realization that both of those things can be alternatively bad at the exact same time. And that's where I am right now. That's where we are right now. It's not a great situation. It's something that I wish was not unfolding the way in which it is. But unfortunately, here we are. These individuals have decided to take these actions. These local authorities have decided it is in their best ability. It is their moral high ground to encourage this kind of nonsense. And unfortunately, you see the end result of it. It leads to people, unfortunately, losing their lives. So, miserable situation. We'll keep an eye on the details as soon as we get more. There's expected to be a big ruling today from the courts as it relates to whether some of these federal operations can continue. I'll provide those details as soon as we get them. If you're not following me on social media, I would encourage you to do so. You can follow me on X at Nicholas M. Craig. You can also follow me on Facebook as well. Just search for The Nick Craig Show on social media. Fortunately, here across southeastern North Carolina, we didn't deal with major impacts from the severe weather over the weekend, the winter weather over the weekend. However, things are going to remain brutally cold in the overnight hours in the coming days. Fortunately, the daytime temperatures aren't terrible. We'll be in the mid to low and upper 40s throughout the remainder of the week. But you look at some of these low temperatures, 19-degree low tonight, 25, 27, 25, and it isn't until portions of early next week, all the way past Groundhog's Day, that we're looking at low temperatures at or above freezing. So things will remain cold across southeastern North Carolina. Fortunately, hopefully not dealing with anything throughout the week. However, there is the possibility of some winter weather this weekend, this Saturday and Sunday. So as we did last week, we'll keep an eye on this throughout the week as we get into the Wednesday, Thursday time frame. We'll start getting more consensus from the various weather models, and we'll figure out exactly what those impacts are going to look like. Don't panic. Don't run to the store and buy supplies, but there is a possibility of some winter weather across the state this weekend. We'll keep an eye on the details, and I'll bring it to you right here on the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group in Wilmington for their continued support. Melissa Gott and her team. You can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call at 910-251-6088. That's going to do it for a Monday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks for joining us live, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, or 24/7, wherever you get your podcasts. We're back here tomorrow morning with the Nick Craig Show.